right now is that when you die, you simply cease to exist. And then at the resurrection, well, there's two resurrections. The first resurrection is when Christ comes and he takes all of the people that are saved to heaven. Everybody else stays dead in the ground. Or if you're alive at that time, you are killed by the sight of Christ. And then 1,000 years later, after Satan and his angels had been roaming around a desolate earth for 1,000 years, Christ comes back, and with the New Jerusalem from heaven descending down onto the earth, and all of the wicked dead people raise up, and Satan arranges them into an army, and they attack the city and are destroyed instantly by God. But prior to being destroyed, they are all shown where they were wrong. So kind of a final ha-ha moment. Told you so.
Look, we're right and you're wrong.
Mm-hmm. And then after that moment, you are annihilated and you cease to exist forever. That's what Adventists call the second death.
I would rather be annihilated and out of existence than actually worshiping a God that I cannot reconcile inside my mind for eternity.
Yeah. And if we're wrong, I wouldn't mind finding out as the last thing that I ever experience.
Me too.
Now, there's only
right along with him.
Yeah, there's only one person that Ellen White explicitly described as being among the lost, and that was Napoleon. And that some of the more evil people, like Napoleon and, of course, Satan, they will take longer to burn up than others.
Apparently, she wasn't gifted with the gift of prophecy because she would really, I'm sure she would really like to speak about Hitler a little bit too. So,
but that wouldn't have made any sense to readers at that time.
Oh no!
So prophets can't use language to be confusing to everybody else.
Yeah,
unless you're John.
All right, now I promised the listeners I would actually like to point something out. The place where Adventists got their birth, where Adventists were birthed, was in the same place. If you go back and listen to our cast from Atheist on Air episode, the same place that the Mormons became a thing is the same place that the Adventists became a thing.
Yeah.
So apparently at that time, the burnt over district of Upper New York was kind of weird.
Ellen White, William Miller, and Joseph Smith all lived about 30 miles apart.
Yeah, they were contemporaries of each other, quite literally.
Yeah. William Miller and Joseph Smith, very, very literally. Ellen White would have been a small child when they were both getting started. And so then, anyway, Ellen started having visions, and these early Adventists they did not trust organization and church structure because of how they'd been treated by the churches they had come from. And so they had to have some way of identifying who was actually a appropriate person to have come speak to your church. And so they did identify a few ministers as leading ministers, and they could ordain new ministers and write out ordination cards and sign them and say, yes, this is somebody I can vouch for who can come preach to you. And James White was one of these leading ministers. Now, under William Miller, prior to the Great Disappointment, James White was a young man and a very minor figure. Post-Great Disappointment, he and Joseph Bates became the major figures. And they were kind of those two kept very close. They were in agreement on a lot of things. And so they were in agreement when it came time to switch from worshiping on Sunday to Saturday. But that did cause a pretty major split among Adventists. The smaller group became the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and the larger group became another Adventist church that now has about 600,000 members, compared to the Seventh-day Adventist Church with 18 million members. Oh, actually, no, the other one is 60,000, not 600,000.
And they do call the smaller group the Millerites, correct?
No.
No? I thought that, okay. You know better than I do, so.
Millerites were that's what everybody was being called prior to the Great Disappointment. And so, that smaller church, Advent Christian Church. There's a few others that have split off, but for the most part, they were splitting from those two later on. Some of them get quite interesting.
Just fascinating, the history, and it's fairly recent history. We're not talking like, talking about Jesus himself. We're talking about things that can actually be studied, and there's real papers that we can read about this. It's so fascinating to see how people can I don't want to say delude, but they're deluding themselves into believing something like this.
We're up to the 1850s at this point. And Ellen, the prophetess, she started traveling with James White, one of the leading ministers, and they would preach together. She would prophesy to people, and James would do a rousing biblical sermon. And they eventually reached the point where it was like, okay, this is getting annoying. We have to get 2 separate hotel rooms, and so they got married.
Well, I guess if you want to do that, So they probably weren't banging or anything, I'm sure.
So fast forward a little bit, and they started getting burned a few times with ownership of property. Since there was no official church structure, it would usually be the head elder of the local church that would actually have the title for the church building and property. And if they left, they still owned it and would take it away. And so that happened a few times. They had a printing press that printed Signs of the Times and the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald, and would print stuff about Ellen White's prophecies and tracts that James would write. James White owned the printing press. And by this time, they'd moved to Battle Creek, Michigan, which is where they had that. And there was a serious problem with ownership, and so they finally incorporated. They created the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventists, and James White, for the first 20 years, he was president most of the time. He'd have brief periods with somebody else as president. Joseph Bates served as president briefly. James really didn't want to be president, but he kept getting stuck with it. And the brethren would get together, the leading ministers, and they would study the Bible, they would pray, and they'd come to conclusion about God's present truth. They had this concept of continuing revelation, that there are things that were fine for the past, but now the present truth is something different. So it was fine to eat bacon 50 years ago, but now the present truth is no, that is not allowed per Leviticus chapter 11.
Hey everybody, this is X.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm Felicia. We're the Utah Outcasts.
3 out, unashamed, and active atheists living in Utah.
And we are personally inviting you to let us love your ears each and every week.
As we take the news, current events, and pop culture and give it a little twist.
A love twist, with consent.
And we'll be joined each week by a special guest to tell us what makes them an outcast like us.
Come find us.
The Utah Outcasts.
On podhell.com, Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play,
Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
And on UtahOutcast.com.
We finally bought that domain off the kids handing out mixtapes in the mall.
Come be an outcast with us.
Take care of yourselves out there.
Bonne nuit.
And you're welcome.
And that actually segues quite nicely into the last segment that I would like to talk about. The weird, wonderful dietary restrictions. If you guys think that Jews and Muslims have it weird, wait till you hear Dustin's story about Adventists.
Okay, so each time that the brethren would come to a conclusion, the next night Ellen would have a vision that would confirm that, yes, this is what God wanted, and give God's seal of approval. And it was really quite convenient when the church president is making these decisions, and then his wife is saying, yes, that was right. And then he would print it. And in the late 18th,
how that works, huh?
Yeah. In the late 1860s, Ellen White started on this health kick. And realistically, it was probably James that was really pushing it. And really what it comes down to is this was anti-sex. They believed that certain things that you eat will inflame the passions and make you horny. James had wrote numerous pamphlets and tracts about ways to avoid solitary vice, masturbation.
What exactly is that?
Masturbation.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I can't wait to get to the cereal part. I really can't wait to get to that.
And so some of the early things to go were alcohol, tobacco, which at the time Tobacco was believed to be good for your lungs.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah, listeners, it's good for you.
Yeah.
Continue smoking.
And so, yeah, so no alcohol, no tobacco, no other strong drinks. So coffee and tea were out. No drugs of any kind unless prescribed by a doctor and absolutely necessary. And no unclean meat. This is picking one chapter out of Leviticus on dietary rules. Just what animals you can eat meat from. They did not worry about the rules surrounding not eating something that was already dead. No rules around bleeding the animal out. So it's not kosher, but it's pretty damn close.
And that's somewhere like what? Leviticus
11.
4 through like 11? Yeah,
11
somewhere around there.
Only one they cared about.
That's it? There's actually dietary restrictions in the previous ones, though.
Yeah.
Why?
The chapters before and after, but they only cared about the restrictions in Leviticus chapter 11. They said that all the other ones were only to make sure that you were clean enough for the sanctuary and the temple.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot there. We haven't even gotten into this. At that point, they haven't even gotten into shrimp yet.
Oh, shrimp would have been included with that chapter.
Was that in 11?
So chapter 11, it has, you can eat mammals if they have cloven hooves and chew their cud. So cows, sheep, goats, deer, elk, those are all okay.
But they can if they don't chew their cud.
If they don't chew their cud or they don't have cloven hooves. So
all that's
rabbits are out, pigs are out. Because pigs have cloven hooves, but they don't chew their cud. Horses are out. They chew their cud, but they don't have cloven hooves.
And the rabbits thing, I've read that like 1,000 times. I never understood that. And then when we get to like shellfish, it has to have scales for you to be able to eat it.
If it's from the water, it must have fins and scales.
Shrimp have fins.
They don't have scales.
Yes, they do.
Not the right kind of scales.
Oh, okay.
Now, the justification, post hoc justification they have for these rules are you don't want to be eating carnivores, like land animal carnivores, because they're not as good of a source of nutrients. You're getting it third hand instead of second hand. You don't want to be eating scavengers because the quality is not going to be as good. And with fish, you don't want to be eating bottom feeders. And with shellfish specifically, they're opposed to them because of their they don't do as good of a job of getting rid of waste.
Now, we were actually just talking via Messenger. Bass have scales, but they're still carnivore. You were going after trout. I got smallmouth just the other day.
Carnivores on land, not a problem in the water.
Just on land.
Yeah. In the water, you just want to make sure they can shit easily and have, scales and fins.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Now, to a certain extent, pork at the time was more prone to give you parasites than beef or mutton was. And shellfish are more prone, if not properly stored and cleaned, to make you sick than other seafood.
Yeah, I grew up in Florida. I know the backstory. It's the hygiene thing and all that. It's just fun to make fun of it. I mean, these guys are actually in the middle of the desert. Yeah, you probably don't want to eat shellfish too far away from the coast.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's probably not the most healthy thing in the world. Same thing with pigs, because they're probably not healthy because that's, pigs aren't necessarily endemic to the desert, as you would, as you might understand. All right. Just, what was it? The last interview you did on Atheist Nomads. Tell us some of the fun, really fun. Now, listeners, if you haven't decided you didn't go or you wanted to go into Adventism just yet, I'm going to let Dustin explain some of the fine delicacies that they have available for you. Blinkettes?
Yes. Okay, so the requirement is no unclean meat, but they do encourage vegetarianism. And you can tell how conservative an Adventist is by how far away from eating meat they are. So a very, very liberal Adventist might indulge in bacon or shrimp on occasion. Your more liberal Adventists will typically eat meat. Your moderate Adventists